Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from Airwiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Soundcuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and Airwiggles, the online home for audio people.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are and when you are, whether you're tuning in later or now. And welcome to our session about the New Forest in the south of England. This is a story from Pablo and I about a field recording session that took place in 2022 when we were working on the Warner Brothers title Hogwarts Legacy. First of all, some introductions. I am Dr. Alexander Horowitz. I'm the audio director at Criterion Games in Guildford, part of Electronic Arts. I've been an audio director, an audio lead, or a head of audio for around 8 years now, working on titles for Warner Brothers, Rockstar, Fox, and EA. My first credit was actually for EA, so I've now come full circle. I've got my PhD in game development and a master's in programming and master's in technical broadcast audio from the Glasgow School of Art, but I originally trained as a composer at the Conservatoire in Scotland, so a mix of the artistic and the technical there. I've also done some consultancy for the UN and for BAFTA, and I'm on the committees of the Audio Engineering Society and the Independent Society of Musicians. I'm joined by Pablo Valverde Branas.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Pablo, senior designer at Studio Gobo, where I joined in around late 2018. Before that, I was working at the Immaginati, in the studio based in London. And prior to getting into the games industry, I used to work as a sound recordist in the film and TV industry. Since 2015, when I got my first recorder, a really small Zoom H2M, I've been recording sounds on my free time, mainly focusing on ambiances. For some reason that I still don't know, I have a special interest in organic sounds such as birds, insects, rain, or wind. In 2017, I decided to share these sounds I was capturing with the audio community, so I founded my own label, Game Walkers. I've also been teaching Wise and Game Audio at SAE Institute Spain in Madrid. Hope you guys enjoy this talk. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you. And we're also joined in spirit by Ben Pickersgill and Callum Fox Forrest. So Ben and Callum came with us on this field recording trip, but can't be involved in the talk today. So thank you. So part one, preparation. What did we do before we went on this trip? Now, obviously, we needed to justify our field recording trip in the first place, and we wanted to go and do some hiking and some exploration and all these different things, but what was the reason behind it? Well, working on Hogwarts Legacy, there were lots of different in-game locations. There were lots of different landscapes, different biomes, types of environments that needed lots of sounds, and we bought all of the ambience libraries that we could find. Not necessarily everything, but everything that pertained to the content that was in game at the time. We'd gone through a sound effect and boom and everything else, but we decided we need something extra. We were also missing a lot of the local wildlife. So Hogwarts itself is based up in Scotland, and we needed something that tried to capture the environment and the ambiences of the UK and specifically Scotland as well. We also thought this would be a good opportunity to bring the team closer together. I mentioned Callum and Ben before. They just joined us as audio interns not long before we went on the trip. So we were looking for a way of essentially bringing them into the fold, getting them up to speed with the game, and getting to know them better as well. Now, we had ideas of the ideal trip. Of course, we'd love to go up to Scotland and stay there for weeks and capture everything we could find. But the reality, of course, is different. The location, we thought about Scotland, we thought about Galloway Forest Park, other national parks up there. But of course, we started to think about New Forest because of where it was, its proximity to where we were developing, which was in Brighton and Hove on the south coast of England, just south of London. We had to think about background noise. Ideally, we'd have a location that had no vehicles, no other background noise. But in the UK, especially in the south of England, that's quite hard to find. We're a very densely populated island, and there's a lot of roads and various other things around here that make noise. So things like train lines, planes, you can see the flight radar airspace here. The southeast of England is actually one of the busiest airspaces in the world. And so you've got lots of air traffic that can muddy up recordings. And cars as well. So you've got lots of main roads, lots of even B roads that start to carry lorry noise and other traffic into your recordings as well. And there's also the consideration of distance and cost and time. If we travel too far, we spend the time traveling rather than actually recording. And we spend the budget on either flights or trains or petrol to get to the location. Finally, there's the weather. Now, British weather is very variable. Pablo's based just north of Madrid, and so we're always joking about how terrible it is here. But we did actually want to capture a range of weather situations. So not just calm days with no wind and just bright sun. We wanted to manage to get lots of different wind, and considering birds as well, birds don't really like being out and singing in torrential rain or gale force winds. So we had to make sure we had a mix of different weather conditions and also birdsong as well. Now, we focused on the New Forest National Park in the end, and New Forest is north of the Isle of Wight to the southwest of London. And you can see here on the bottom right, it's a very large tract of land. It's a 70,000 acre site, 280 square kilometers. And yes, has roads and things running through it now, but it's one of the most untouched parts in the south of England. It's a special area of conservation. It has lots of different accolades and awards and different, say, preservation orders. If I listed them all on this slide, it would go off the bottom of the screen. But it means that it is rich in wildlife. You've got birds, which is the main thing we were looking for. Interestingly, it has all 3 varieties of native British snake, which is pretty cool, and roaming cattle. You might see some of this later on in some images. Wild horses or semi-wild horses and other cattle roaming around the park as well. Importantly, it's away from a lot of road and air traffic. You can see in the bottom right there, the A31 cutting through, but a lot of the other roads are much smaller. And there are areas, especially nearer Lyndhurst, which are right in the middle of this park where you're starting to get away from all that traffic. Here is the aviation map, the aviation chart for the Southampton airspace. And you can see by the time you get to Lyndhurst, which is to the west-southwest of Southampton, you're actually above that controlled airspace. So planes coming out, and especially single or twin propeller planes, less likely to muddy up the recordings there.
Let's now talk tiny bit about the equipment we took with us. So the gear we used is a combination of what we already had at the studio, plus equipment I've been purchasing for myself during these years. In summary, we managed to get 3 different recorders and 3 different sets of microphones. This allowed us to record up to 3 different locations simultaneously. What all these microphones have in common is very low self-noise. The recorders are also famous for their good preamps. Another thing worth mentioning is, of course, portability. We had to carry them for long walks and possibly hide them. So in other words, that means to us, the smaller and the lighter the gear is, the better. The hike would be more enjoyable, and we would definitely have a better sleep if we knew the equipment was hidden properly. There's a nice variety of equipment here. We brought with us a 32-bit recorder like the Mikro Usis. We also brought the Zoom F8, which has 8 XLR inputs, and a recorder that fits in pretty much any pocket, such as the super famous and super reliable D100. For the mics, 8040s, which are cardioid mics, and the long mics, which are all omnidirectional. So we had several polar pattern options. The Sennheiser MKH series is well known for performing better than other mics in extreme humidity and weather conditions. And well, like Alex said, I'm Spanish, and I unfortunately don't have too much faith in British weather. Another thing to factor in is wind protection. In this case, we went for Rycote and Bumblebee. Other equipment we tend to ignore, but it's as important as any mic or recorder. Those are batteries, SD cards, tape, cables, or dry bags. Since the goal of the trip was not only to capture sounds for a game, but also to expand our technical knowledge, trying out different stereo configurations was something we definitely wanted to do for the good of the team. And this also shows the versatility of the equipment. we could have all sorts of different setups in the field. The stereo configurations we use were ORTF with the 8040s plugged into the mix pre. If we wanted something wider, we had the option of using a couple of long uses in AB plugged into either the mix pre 6 again or the Zoom F8. And if we wanted something even wider and more immersive, we also had 4 long uses that could be tapped to a tree and turn that into a 3-ear setup in quad. We also had a couple of lavalier mics, like the Mikro Usis that would go with the D100. However, one thing I have to say is that the pickup pattern of a microphone helps you up to some degree, but it's not the answer to everything. The most effective way to include or exclude sounds from your recording, in my opinion, is to find the most suitable distance between the mic and the source. Well, out there in the field, most of the time, that's something you definitely cannot control. I guess that's the magic of field recording.
Absolutely.
Well, that's me.
So looking at other gear, things that aren't necessarily audio related, navigation was a big consideration for this, and maps. I've got my prop. I don't know whether you can see this here. This is my New Forest Ordnance Survey map, and this came around like a Bible when we were going around New Forest. I got a lot of stick for it from the rest of the folks on the trip, but having a paper copy of a map let us actually sit either when we were taking a quick break or at the end of the day and look at where we'd been, and we covered a lot of distance on foot each day. A compass that goes along with this, and so we start to become the explorer that you can see Pablo rocking the gear of here on the right-hand side. Phones, of course, essential, but not going to work if we run out of battery or can't charge them, but also the coverage was terrible there. So making sure we had the content downloaded beforehand. So if we're using a digital map on the phone, making sure we've gone into Google Maps or whatever you use and actually downloaded everything in advance back in the hotel or on the road. There were also some practical considerations as well. So food and drink. This might sound obvious, but when you're hiking for as far as we did each day, and you're not really stopping apart from when you get the odd lunch break, which happens to be quite short, having enough supplies that aren't audio related on you is actually really helpful. Clothing, again, Pablo modeling this here, having suitable footwear. There's a lot of hiking we're doing, so that's really important. Considering the weather, if it starts to rain, and especially if it starts to rain heavily, we can't really do anything. We can't just go back to the hotel and wait for it to finish because we've got to get these recordings. We're there for a set period of time and we have to make sure we press on. So we can't stop for bad weather. And of course, lots of hiking as well. And so having decent footwear, decent gear, and making sure you're comfortable is really, really important. So moving on to part 2, the adventure itself. The hiking we've talked about, miking things up, and we'll talk about the ploughman's lunch a bit later on as well. So we chose the 27th and 28th of April in 2022 for this. And there were a bunch of reasons why that was the best date for us. We needed something that was a weekday. We didn't want to have tourists there on the weekend or families. We were also at work as well. It might sound like we had a lot of fun, and we did, but we were working during the week. And so we wanted to go and do that as part of work and actually get some rest afterwards. Tourists is a consideration. If we had gone during a period where lots of tourists were there, especially in the summer, we may have found that we could hear tourists across all of our recordings, especially if they have to get there, if we're looking at increased road traffic and things. We wanted to capture spring birds. So, of course, it necessitates going there during the spring, but there's also the consideration of the time of day as well and when bird song cycles are actually going to be there for us to record. Looking at holidays, so public holidays, bank holidays, when the schools are off on break as well, that's really important. If we'd waited for a school break by mistake and then 30 school children are swarming through the forest where we're recording, those takes are going to be unusable for when they're there. And there's also light and dark cycles as well. You can see here this this graph from time and date. That's today's date there, the 11th of June. And you can see there's actually no night today at New Forest. There's technically no night. There's astronomical twilight, there's nautical twilight, but there is no darkest night. And so going a bit earlier in the year, in April, meant that we could capture lots of things during the day because we had lots of sunlight to work with to navigate. And then at night, we could set up recorders at about 6 p.m. and they could record all the way through the night to capture that nighttime ambience as well. Looking at the time and date here, this is the school holidays. So we've got the spring and Easter holidays to consider. If we'd gone during those, we could have ruined our takes. The half-term dates are more holidays for the schools. These differ across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, so that's to consider. And then there are public holidays as well. So these all just pile on top of each other and give you lots of dates that aren't going to work. This is the initial route. This isn't the foot route, this is the driving route. And we started across in Brighton. We had Callum come down from London. Ben, Pablo, and I were all in Brighton or Hove. And so we met at Brighton Station with all of our gear, piled into my car, and I drove us across to New Forest. It says about 2 hours here. It was actually a lot longer than this, and we'll go into that a bit later on. Now, when we got there, we were greeted with scenes like this. Some of the first locations were fantastic, but we didn't necessarily know where exactly to start. We'd already looked at the routes. Again, we'd looked in the maps and started to do some research. But the difficulty is when you come across a good location, you're not sure if the next location you find is going to be even better. And if you spend all of your field recording gear on the first 3 locations that you find, and then you find one that's even much better for the 4th, you're going to be kicking yourself that you didn't use one of those more conservatively. So we did a lot of hiking to start off with. You can see Callum, Ben, and Pablo here on the bottom going off on the hike down there. And so, yeah, starting to record was quite a tricky issue. We knew we wanted to capture dawn and dusk cycles, so we wanted to make sure we had recording going on from all 3 sound recorders during the day, and then we get them recharged with new SD cards, back up the data, and set them off to record at night again. One of the big considerations was whether the gear was safe, and we talked about this all the time. We were going to New Forest that we hadn't been to before. We took several £1,000s worth of recording gear, and we left it. So we didn't stay and monitor this gear. We actually set it up to record for 3, 4, 5 hours, and we left it and we hiked somewhere else. And the only reassurance that we had was that it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. So no one would actually find the gear. And if they did, they wouldn't be the type that would steal it. That's what we were hoping anyway. We tried to camouflage things. So we tried to put some leaves around things, and we tried to use certain colored dry bags to help make it not stand out so much. But again, you can't be too sure. I'll just say it now. We didn't lose anything, thankfully, but it was on our minds the whole time. Rain as well. Rain was a consideration. Now, we did have things in dry bags, but of course the microphones can't be inside a dry bag. So we were aware that if we had torrential rain, we're soaking the mics. Is that going to be good for them? Probably not. So that was also a consideration as we were going around the forest. Here are some shots as well. So we've got on the left-hand side, just one of the types of trails that we came across. Interestingly, we've got this tree cover above there. So we started finding locations about this where we thought, well, this seems really interesting. Are we going to capture something which gives a sense of height? We weren't necessarily doing those types of recordings, but can we get the feeling that we're under cover or surrounded by foliage? So that was interesting. Pablo on the top right there, sorting out the levels in one of the dry bags and just monitoring before we set to record. And the ploughman's lunch there, which I said I'd mention on the bottom right. This was one of our lunches. It was invented by the cheese manufacturers in the 1970s. It sounds like an ancient lunch, but actually it's a marketing ploy to sell more cheese, but it was delicious. So here is a diagram of the overall recording on the trip. We started in a place called Fritton, and the second day was in Matley Wood. And you can see here on the far left-hand side, not sure if you can see my cursor, but we've got setting off from Brighton all the way across to New Forest. And some of this travel is on foot, starting to go around New Forest and look for good locations. Once we found a location we were happy with and we thought we'd commit a sound recorder to, that's location 1. And we set that to record for a few hours. We did some more hiking, found locations 2 and 3. Once we'd set everything up, there was nothing we could do. We could, of course, take notes and do some more research, but we thought at that point, it's a good time to go for lunch. And so went for lunch, left those recording, got to take a break, and then we started to hike back round and collect recorders 1, 2, and 3. When we collected 1, we then set that up as recording 4. And so this was starting to get towards the early evening where we wanted to get the nighttime takes that would go all the way through the night. So recorders 4 and 5 are essentially the full night recordings. We didn't do a 6 then because I think it was a battery issue. But we did set up 4 and 5, and then we went and had dinner, and we planned our route for the next day. We got the map like captains of a ship, put the map down on the pub table, and had a look and decided where we wanted to go and what we'd learned from that day. And also took notes as well that built up this diagram. This comes from a written list that we had along the way and some notes we took at the end of the day. We got up very early. I don't recall when, Pablo, but I think it was Pablo and I drew the short straws and said, we'll get up early and we'll go and collect the first bit of kit. And then we went and recharged it, got some breakfast, picked up kit number 5, and then the 4 of us started to travel to Matley Wood and set up recorders 6, 7, and 8. And so 6, 7, and 8 is a bit like 1, 2, 3, but in different locations and with different mic configurations as well. We kept swapping the recorders and the mics just to experiment. And sometimes we thought, well, if we've got 4 hours from that location, let's change the location and the mics and see what we get. Once we'd set up number 8, went for lunch, did some hiking to collect 6, 7, 8, and did some more travel and maybe had a celebration at the end. Interestingly, my iPhone, I was looking through the health data on the health app when preparing this slide, and I had a look at the pedometer and the step count. And you can see here a few steps around the station, getting into the car, seeing everyone. And then the majority of that travel towards the end there is on foot, hiking around locations. It dips down and goes down for lunch. And then 4 and 5, we're looking for locations again. There's a gap here where we've had the break. And then you've got the locations in the morning. These are slightly not synced up, essentially, but we've got lots of hiking in the morning. And once we set up the new recorders, we can have a break again. So it's interesting the amount of travel and the amount of non-audio considerations that are required here as well.
Now I want to talk a tiny bit about some of those recordings, the equipment we use, and why we chose that location. This one was on day 1, and after around 1 hour hiking, we found our first location. What made this spot a good one was that it was away from human-made noise. We hadn't heard any noise for the last 20 minutes or so, no traffic, and no more enthusiastic hikers. Remember, this was a weekday. We knew we were going to pick up this equipment after lunch, so that gave us a window of around 3-4 hours. That means that the location needed to be good right at that time and not later on. Weather was clear, around 15 Celsius or 59 Fahrenheit. Birds were singing non-stop with a good presence of them, but without becoming a massive chorus. We couldn't hear any insects either. So that's what basically what we're chasing. We set up the 8040s with the Ryco RTF windshield a few meters away from the source. We left, now with some concerns because, well, the microphone was visible, even though we tried to use some camouflage that didn't work out very well, but in the end, happy ending. Now we're gonna play 15 seconds of that recording. This is all raw material, by the way. This one is quite a different scenario. We wanted to leave an overnight rig, and this was the time to do so. First thing we decided was that it had to go unnoticed by people. Some of the people we ran into earlier that day, and curious horses we also saw that day, and we have some recoveries of horses near the bike. What was the smallest gear we had? That was the D100 with the 2 lav mics, the Mikro Usis. We tapped them into a tree. Voila, first problem solved. We also knew that, thanks to previous experiences with the D100, the battery was very, very reliable. However, the second problem was more difficult to manage. We found this very quiet location away from any kind of human activities, but it also meant that it was very quiet by the time we press rec. The plan is to leave this recording all night long, but we're going to capture for so many hours, we basically didn't know. Perhaps it was just going to be silence like it is right now, or we're going to get some action. The D100 preamps are good, but not that good. I have to say, as I said, we needed some action. So in the end, what we did is we prioritized this quiet location over a noisy one, hoping that the night and the early morning would give us what we were chasing, which was birds. Whether that was single bird calls resonating across the forest at night, or a very busy chorus of birds at dawn, we needed one of those two, or ideally the two of them. So we left again. We hope for the best, which was the equipment would be still there, alive the morning after, and we would have gotten some nice recordings. In this slide, this is a very interesting one because just by taking a look at those pictures, we can see how much the soundscape can change at the same location. Shall we have a listen at the early morning one? And the third and last example, this was on the second day. Even though we didn't need to run files for this project, we wanted to test how a quad recording would work if we use a tree. We unfortunately couldn't find a tree with a thick track, so we used the branches instead, as you can see in the picture on the right. The mix pre was already recording in a different location, so we had to use the F8. As you can see in that same picture, the dry bags, apart from protecting the equipment from weather, can also work as a hanger. We love this location because, well, it was deep into the woods and presence of birds was dispersed enough to avoid having any main protagonists in the recording. Let's now have a listen. And in this slide, we have more beautiful pictures of that tree. There's a funny story about the one on the left with the F8. Game wasn't set up properly on the left channel. Nobody noticed that. Good thing, I guess, is that it hasn't happened since then. I guess we'll learn something after all.
So moving on to part 3 then, what happened when we got back from our trip? Well, first of all, we had to ingest our data, and we ended up with almost 100 gig of raw audio, 43 hours of recordings. And I've put it on here, the sheer amount of stuff. We didn't really realize along the way how much we were recording until we got back and tried to look at it all and work out how to listen to it. It turned into about 2.5 hours of mastered recordings by the end. And we didn't lose any data. We were terrified, along with the camouflage problem and the rain problem, that we would lose data. But I had a laptop on my back the whole time. I was swapping out SD cards, and we did some backing up online as well when we got back to the hotel at the end of the day. So we didn't lose anything because everything was backed up.
First thing we always did when recording something is to make sure we slate each recording at the start and at the end. We always mention the equipment we're using, time of day, location, what's going on, what we are hearing when we leave, and when we pick up the equipment. That's sort of a start. This is very important because, we will most likely not remember that recording when we sit down in the studio a week or a month later. So after packing everything up, we could start with the editing. Those raw files were copied into a new folder that became the editing one. Even though I would have loved to listen to everything we recorded, I just didn't have the time to go through each file and listen to all 43 hours. What became a massive time saver for us was RX, isotope RX. Just by looking at the spectrogram, I could tell what was interesting to us and what could be discarded. Things like individual core, bird calls, distant flame, or a train, or even hikers walking by were quite easy to spot through the spectrogram. I dropped markers to name those events, so I didn't use at this point any destructive editing. Shall we go to the next slide? Thanks. So those editing files were duplicated once again, and now we had the soon to become master files. At this point, destructive editing is allowed, such as spectral editing. I have to say in some cases, spectral editing can make us rescue recordings that otherwise we couldn't use when there's no way to avoid capturing distant human-made sounds. My approach is to basically copy the good parts of a recording and paste them into the dirty ones. As long as it doesn't cover a lot of the spectrum and there's no relevant content going on, this could work. But yeah, this also needs to be used carefully or everything will end up sounding unnatural and very odd. In terms of EQ, in some recordings, I had to get rid of most of the low content since we could hear some traffic rumble in the distance. Some other recordings only needed a high pass filter around 30-40 Hertz. No compression, limiting, or noise reduction was applied to the master files. We would take that into account once the assets were mastered. Basically depends. We're not doing this because it depends on the needs of the project. Same applies to the mix. What can work for one project doesn't mean it will work for the next one. So at this stage, basically the less processing the assets have, the better. Since we had very, very long recordings, we had to turn those into small pieces of around 3 to 5 minutes. This might sound obvious, but the goal here was not to break the natural flow of a soundscape, for example, by not cutting bird sounds halfway through. The last thing we did was to implement the metadata. We use UCS for that matter, Universal Category System. UCS, for those who don't know, this is a public domain that provides a category list of SFX. The idea is to offer a solid categorization of those sound effects, so it's not the Wild West anymore when you are searching for a sound in your favorite audio asset manager, whether that's Soundly, SoundMiner, or any other one. Now we're gonna play montage that includes those master audio files along with some footage we took in that trip. Well, actually, Alex took in that trip.
And this really shows off some of the landscapes as well.
Yeah. It's a bit laggy, but you get the idea. Yeah.
And this is what happens when it then goes finally into the game. So this isn't necessarily just the ambience recordings from New Forest, but this is a mixture of different parts of the ambience with some New Forest in there as well. Finally then, part 4, reflections. What did we learn from our trip, especially in this postmortem 2 years later? So 8 things we wish we'd known. And some of these have come up in the chat already, actually. See if they match what you've thought already. Planning more time to get into Brighton, for getting out of Brighton, for traveling across, for hiking. We found that we were stuck in traffic on the way to Brighton, or I was stuck in traffic driving there. Then getting out obviously took just as long. So that 2-hour drive across the New Forest took far longer, more like 3+ hours, which killed some of the time that we could have been using earlier in the morning to record. We might have got, if we'd got up earlier again, we might have got an extra load of 3 recorders in there. Calling ahead, we considered calling bars or restaurants or local tour guides or anything else to find some locations to go and record in. But then we realized that the kind of things we wanted to know, i.e. field recording things, the people who run the pubs don't necessarily know what sounds good or what we're looking for. So maybe what we could have done was speak to other field recorders, people who've gone out there before, and get some tips from them. A recording check protocol. Pablo alluded to this earlier with the D100, I think it was, or the F8 rather, and that we didn't set the gain correctly. I think it was 35 or 40 dB too cold. And so what we did from then on was to make sure that somebody else was double checking the settings. We also had this thing, a bit like, when you go on holiday and you're not sure if you locked the door or you've left the gas on, we thought, did we press record? Now, we did press record for every time, but I think there were a couple of times we went back and we actually opened it back up and checked that we were recording, and we were, and we realized if somebody else checks as well, that's the way to do it. Having a listen for a while before we go off into our next location. That was something that we did, but not necessarily for as long as we could have done. So maybe we did that for 20 seconds or 30 seconds. We were lucky in that everything worked, but we might have found that actually there was this periodic intermittent noise coming from a certain location. Maybe there's a creaky branch on a tree or something similar that only creaks when it's high wind. So we needed to be careful, and we were lucky, but we should have listened for longer. An efficient route. We did a lot of hiking, and we didn't need to do all of that. And we realized when we checked the map at the end of the day, we'd actually doubled back on ourselves 3 or 4 times and added a few extra miles into the walking that we didn't need to do. Number 6, somebody alluded to this earlier in the chat, camouflaging gear or using a sign that's saying, well, we talked about pretending we were from a bird charity, which isn't exactly very ethical. But what we could have done is said, we are researchers. Essentially, we were trying to capture acoustic ecology. So we could have just said, we're trying to capture bird sounds. Please leave this gear alone. That's our job. And we really appreciate it if you could leave it. And it might have made us feel a bit more easy about leaving expensive gear in the woods. Number 7 is to carry more of the accessories or the extra bits that we didn't think we'd need. So we had tape and we had cable ties and ropes and things, but we found that the tape didn't always stick to itself or what we were sticking it onto. We sometimes didn't have the right type or length of rope. It was too light, it was too heavy. So having some extra bits there would have been really useful. And again, somebody alluded to this earlier, AirTags on recording setups. We used WhatsApp location, and we sent the location to ourselves, but we should have put AirTags. There was only 3 recording devices, so we should have put AirTags on or some other type of tracking beacon so we'd know where things were. So this then brings us to the overall value of the trip. Now, ultimately, we captured lots of new sounds. This was really useful looking back at the project and trying to flesh out all of those spaces, especially the entire map's worth of ambience on Hogwarts Legacy. There was a big team training aspect, which we thought might be useful, but we didn't realize how far that would extend to. Both training Callum and Ben on some new mic techniques and new recorders and how they worked, but also Pablo and I to experiment and to gain more knowledge there as well. Team building was a big thing. Again, we thought it'd be useful, but we didn't realize how well it would work getting to know the interns quickly, because they're coming into the industry. They had some previous experience on other projects and things, but they were coming into our studio and we wanted to make them feel welcome. We also wanted to get to know them, and bringing them on a trip away from the studio where we then had dinner in the hotel and that kind of thing really helped to break the ice.
Don't forget that after 2 long years, we just came out of a pandemic. So being outdoors in nature made us feel alive once again.
That was a really important thing, actually. And getting away from the screens, getting away from the studio. Of course, Studio Gobo is a fantastic place, but getting away from technology here for a second and having it in our hands and then leaving it, let us recharge a bit, and also to reflect on what we've done so far on the project and what we wanted to do going forward until the end of release. So that brings us to the close of our session. Thank you for joining us. I know you're from different time zones and all over the world, so thank you. That's been the New Forest field recording for Hogwarts Legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
We'd like to give some special thanks to Air Wiggles. Of course, the AirCon conference, fantastic initiative. We really appreciate being part of it. Warner Brothers and Avalanche Software is fantastic working with them on Hogwarts Legacy, and Studio Gobo, where Pablo still is, of course. Fantastic studio, and we really enjoyed working there and working on this project. And also, obviously, special thanks and a shout out to Callum Fox Forrest and Ben Pickersgill as well, both looking a bit cheeky here in the New Forest. It was fantastic to bring them on board to the team, to work with them, and also just getting to know them on the trip as well. You know, they're both friends as well as former colleagues now. Now, we do have some time for Q&A. I think we'll probably have about 10 minutes or so. There's been some questions come up in the chat already, but if anyone has anything now, or Greg might be collating these as well for us, please feel free to let us know. Greg, fantastic. Okay. Gregory Albert, I see 96K at 24-bit. Would you now consider 32-bit float at all? So Pablo, what do you think about using 32-bit?
We did. We used 32-bit with the mix pre. Basically, what gave us is less concerns about if something all of a sudden it's going to happen, something super loud, basically the mics are going to clip. In this case, since we were going after birds, that shouldn't be a problem because, well, we checked so many things like we're going to have, I don't know, a thunderstorm all of a sudden. That wasn't the case. But if, for example, we were chasing thunders, definitely 32-bit float will help a lot.
This question from Sarushan here. I'm curious, do you delete the unused data after the project is over? No, that's a problem for IT. So 100 gigs, not too much, but I believe, Pablo, it's still on the server there.
Yeah, it's still there, still alive.
I think if we got to the point of having to delete the data, it would be a huge shame. There'd have to be a reason for doing this because you've captured all of this footage that took a lot of work to do. Yes, it was only 2 days, but actually there's all of the preparation for it. There's all of the effort on the trip. So no, we'll be holding on to that for as long as possible, really. Lewis says, did you use any notes or signs on the or around your gear in case someone found it, or Apple AirTags? So yeah, you beat me to it there. We did think about signs. We did think about AirTags, but we largely thought about them on the night of the first day and thought, I wish we had some signs. And we didn't really have the ability to make a sign in the hotel because we need to laminate it and that kind of thing. But we'll definitely be doing it in the future. Uta says, what duration are the recordings mostly during daytime to catch right balance between variations and useful content? Looking at the graph before, I think it was 3 or 4 hours, but Pablo, maybe you could speak to this.
Yeah, I think what we captured was around 3-4 hours. And then when it comes to mastering, they were down to, I just had a quick look. I think the shorter is 2.5 minutes and the longest 11 minutes. I'm not saying this is what's going to go into the game, but it's the duration of those master files.
Connor says, are you using battery packs or disposable batteries? Any brands you'd recommend for several hours of reliable recording? To my knowledge, I think we used only battery packs, although did we have any AA's that we were swapping in?
Yeah, we use, so for the F8 and the Mix Pre battery packs, definitely recommend Anchor. I think that's the name of the brand. And the D100, because you cannot use an external battery for that one, was, AA batteries. I think we use, is it called Enelop? Something like that. I can have a look. Enelop, I think that's the name of the brand.
I remember turning up with a massive bag of batteries and some rechargeables and some disposables. I mean, preferably I'd rather use rechargeables, but I think we just grabbed a load of stuff. It might have even been on the way there. I think we topped up when we were at a petrol station or something.
Actually, I think, yeah, we use rechargeable batteries with the D100.
Should have documented things more. A question here: did you record ambisonic audio? If not, why not? It's great to see ambisonics is making such a resurgence as well, considering it's what 1960s, 1970s technology. No, and I think the reason why we didn't was because we didn't have a mic. It's normally a sound field mic I've used. I know, Pablo, you've had an Ambeo in the past before. I think you sold it.
Yep, yeah, don't have that with me anymore. And I mean, like I said, well, we didn't have an ambisonic mic, first of all. And the other reason was that even though we captured something in quad, we didn't need anything surround or ambisonic in this case for this project. So that wasn't a concern for us.
We have used them in the past before as well, though. I think when Pablo and I were working on Planet of the Apes VR for Fox, we used ambisonics there. So we're not adverse to ambisonics. It was just the nature of the gear we had and what we were looking to record. Baz says, how did you handle water condensation when leaving the mics overnight? Was the dry bag enough? Sheer luck. Luck might be the answer for that. I mean, how did we... I don't even think we considered it. We thought, let's just set this up and hope for the best. Pablo?
Yeah, I mean, it was all right. We didn't have any issues with humidity or water condensation. Maybe it was the weather, but yeah, that wasn't an issue at all. I was actually more worried about rodents when we tapped the Mikro Usis to a tree, left all that recording all night than humidity or water condensation.
I don't know how clear we've made it here, but there were lots of conversations about mics going missing, horses eating mics. Someone said right to the chat about half an hour ago, did you have any problems with creatures or animals or critters? And I responded, yeah, it was a big thing. It's not. We didn't have anyone running off with anything, any rats gnawing through cables or anything. But there are recordings that we haven't included in this of horses getting up close to the mics and having a sniff around. Giovanni says, did you feel it was worth it to do all this work compared to what you could be achieving in designing the ambiences using libraries? I think it was out of necessity, really, because we had gone through libraries and we'd looked through everything or everything that we could find, and we just weren't getting enough. So it's not that the quality wasn't there, it's that the quality was there, but we needed at least 2 or 3 times what was there. And because of the nature of Hogwarts, we had variations on season, time of day, location, weather. So all of that's there. You're essentially multiplying the variations and the different types of assets that you need. So we would have done if we could, but actually looking back, because of the team training element and all the rest of it, there are additional justifications for why we would have gone in the first place.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, massive, yes, definitely. It was worth it. And I don't think we wouldn't achieve the same without getting these recordings.
Char writes, did you ever consider using hydrophones? We had talked about hydrophones and those electromagnetic microphones and a bunch of other cool and crazy things, like contact mics and things. I think from my opinion is that what might have happened if we brought a hydrophone or two along is we'd have spent more time messing around with hydrophones than setting up and hiking around for good locations, just because it would have been novel and interesting, and inevitably someone would have fallen in a lake or a river, and it just adds a bunch of extra silliness to the equation. But I think there's definitely a benefit to using them, and I would probably do a dedicated shoot with places that have lots of rivers and streams and lakes and things. Pablo?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular case, yeah, we were not going after water. If that was the case, we definitely would have used a hydrophone. We actually had a couple of hydrophones in studio, but yeah, in this case, we didn't need them, and the amount of time we had to record basically birds was limited. So yeah, we basically wanted to focus on just capturing birds.
Kipras writes, could you elaborate on the mastering process? What did you consider as useful and not useful content? Also, was one of the recording setups used more than others in the masters? Pablo, I'm going to throw this one over to you.
Yeah, so what do you consider useful and not useful content? So basically when you've done this editing process tons of times, sometimes just by looking at the spectrogram, you can see, okay, this is basically what we have right here is people talking, hikers near the mic. So even though you listen to that, it's quite easy to recognize those kind of sounds or pictures in this case in the spectrogram. Whereas when that same thing is a bird call really close to the mic, that's also easy to spot just by taking a look at, for example, of the frequency. In terms of recording setups that we use more than others, something I really like was the maybe you guys, this is gonna take you as a surprise, but it was the D100 with the Mikro Usis, basically leaving that setup all night recording. We managed to get a lot of good content with that one. It's the cheapest recording among all three. Is the cheapest. All those are the cheapest mics, but yeah, sometimes it's not the gear you use, but the location being there at the right moment.
Like Hendrix playing a $50 guitar. That's being kind to think there. So Mark says, I'm a sound engineering student from London. Where would be a good place to research field recording techniques? And do you know of any good accessible resources? Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a resources page on my site. I think it's at alexanderhorowitz.com/resources, which have some things on there about, it's largely courses and books as well. So all of the different books about game audio, leading with sound and game audio mixing and all those things for about 20 years are all on there. But of course, I mean, it might sound a bit cliche here, but the Air Wiggles community has been really fantastic. There are loads of conversations that go on here about recording. And I think if you were to raise a thread for that as well, I think everyone would pile in from the chat here and start giving you ideas. Pablo?
There's also the A Song Effect blog. That's a really good one. There's as well the field recording Facebook group. I joined that one, I don't know when that was, maybe 10 years ago. That's also a good one. Like Alex said, probably Air Wiggles is one of the best ones. And the other thing, the best resource, I'd say go out and record and practice. That's the best learning curve, I think.
You can't beat it, and especially if you can take someone along more experienced. What we did on the shoot for this trip was Pablo was essentially the main recordist. I was in charge of logistics, and then Ben and Callum were in the position to just soak up anything. And of course, they've gone and done loads of great things since. But it was an opportunity for me to focus on where we were going and how we were getting there and all that kind of thing, swapping out batteries and things, and Pablo to be positioning mics. So it's if you can learn from other people, it's fantastic. Just a few comments here. Christian says, I love the sound field mics. My uni had one. My uni had one as well. And of course, they've got that WXYZ output conversion thing as well. So there's all this extra gear, but we didn't have one, but it could be interesting in the future.
My
having
uni
a look
didn't.
here. Sorry?
My uni didn't have one of those, but
we just didn't have one. And, I suppose that's the thing with the kit list, is that it could have had dozens of microphones on there and loads of recorders, but we made the best of what we could with the gear and the time. I think we'd have loved to have gone for a week or two and take 12 different recording setups and leave them everywhere with clever signs and air tags. I'm sure we will in the future, especially if I can get myself down to Madrid and we'll go on a field recording session there. But you do the best with what you can do, yeah. Another comment here, Archie says, having a bit of real-life recordings mixed in with sound libraries gives it a bit of character. That's what we thought as well. Of course, it was a necessity, but at the same time, where it's not just library content, although there's some fantastic library stuff out there, it's about trying to inject, for us, it might sound weird, but memories of New Forest. I hear these recordings and it takes me back to hiking with my friends through the woods. Jasper says, did you consider layering these recordings in heightening the mystical mood of the ambience for the game? If so, what did you use? So layering, Pablo.
What did we use? That's a good one. Yeah, apart from this, we purchased a lot of boom libraries. There's also, if you guys can check out George Blatt's sound libraries as well. I think, yeah, he runs Mindful Audio. There's also Thomas Rex Verberly. He's got plenty of different sound libraries. I think the last one he released was about Patagonia in Chile and Argentina. It's also a few more. Can't remember right now, but yeah, mainly those. I think it was a combination of those three plus all the recordings we took in this trip.
I'm going to just pick another couple of questions because we're running up to the hour. Gregory says, is the Mikro Usis series, are these common to use? I'm not sure. I mean, we didn't think they were necessarily the first choice everyone would go for, but they were definitely interesting to use on the trip.
They are super easy to carry. I mean, even if you are, don't know, on a trip with your family, your partner, you can just drop those into a bag with the Tip100 or any other handheld recorder you have. That means basically the gear you have access to, that's the best gear.
Should have gone on the slides. It's a good quote, that. Vincent says, why did you decide on using A/B technique for the ambience recording? Pablo?
Because we were using ORTF. It was wide, but not as wide as what A/B would give us, using a couple of omnidirectional mics. And also the other thing was we wanted to get as many different setups as possible, because then we wanted to have a listen at this in the studio with, well, for ourselves and the interns as well, just to, some team training, basically become better sound designers.
I'm going to take one more question here from Baz. How did you communicate or justify the field recording trip within Studio Gobo, if even you had to? What part did team building play and how you communicated that? Team training probably wasn't the first thing we said, but we basically stressed the point that we need some sounds. I think we might have said, look at how much we're spending on libraries and look at how much it'll cost to send us to the New Forest for 2 days. And then look at all of these additional benefits and bonuses as well. And I don't remember it being a struggle. I think the team at Gobo, or the studio heads and other people at Gobo, were very happy to sign this off. It wasn't that expensive. It might have been interesting for us to explore the cost, but it wasn't huge. It was my car driving across, 4 people in a hotel for 1 night, and the rest was just lunch and dinner. And I think we didn't put beer on the budget, so I think that's it was fairly inexpensive for the amount of content we got back. I'm just going to, one final thing here, is to share this. And so we'll leave the Q&A there. Thank you for all your questions. Really interesting questions and actually giving us a lot to think about for next time. So thank you. Getting in touch. If you've got any questions for us, anything you want to add or say or that you didn't get to put in the chat here, you can let us know. So I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's my only social media platform. I'm on linkedin.com at Alexander Horowitz, or you can get me on my website at alexanderhorowitz.com. You
guys can also contact me on LinkedIn as well, or through my website, gamewalkers.com. Hope you guys enjoy this talk. Like Alex said, if you have any other question that we haven't been able to answer, drop us a message on LinkedIn or any other way. We'll be more than happy to carry on talking about field recording and all this stuff. Fantastic. Well, great to see you all. Thanks for all the questions, and best of luck on your field recording projects in the future. Goodbye for now. Thank you very much for attending.